Hello. Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for joining our monthly Pluribus webinar. Bonne année, Happy New Year. You know, we're still in January, so it's still the right time to wish you all and you know, and your families and friends and colleagues, you know, a very successful year full of respect, peace and health. My name is Isabelle Pujol. I am the founder and director of Pluribus. Pluribus is a global partners to help organizations, teams, individuals to really succeed through diversity and inclusion, through inclusion and diversity. So really our intention is to ensure that you know, organizations are really taking the topic of inclusion and diversity as a strategic topic. So, you know, it's really about walking the talk. So today we are going to have the opportunity to spend 1 hour together. So, you know, this is going to be recorded. And you also have the opportunity to ask questions. There is an icon where you could post some questions, so we will make sure to check. I'm very happy that the guest of our webinar today is Magda Barceló. Magda is based in Spain, outside Barcelona, or I could say Reus. I'm sure you will tell where you are based. I have the pleasure to work with Magda for a number of years now. And I really enjoy her passion for the inclusion and diversity topic. I believe that Rob McNamara is going to join us. He's from Boulder in Colorado. There is some time difference, and he might have some you know, difficulties. So we're not too sure actually whether he will be able to join. However, we didn't want to cancel. Maybe this webinar is going to be very informal. It's going to be a dialogue around the topic of inclusive behaviors. You know, what are the key skills for leaders to promote inclusion in the organization, in his or her teams, and especially in walking the talk. And Magda, who is also an executive coach, will provide us with some you know, insights, examples, practices of having some coaching really dedicated to the I&D key values. So welcome, and let's have really an informal conversation. So Magda, really happy to have you in this webinar and hear your insights.
Thank you, Isa. Thank you very much, and hi everybody. And yes, as Isa said, so we have another guest, Rob McNamara. He is the expert on adult development, and that was, you know, the intention of this call to have him, listen to him about, you know, his insights on why adult development supports diversity and inclusion, and in what ways. So we'll just hope that he may join sometime during the webinar. Otherwise, we'll just continue this creative dialogue that we hope it's useful for you. I may provide some background, Isa, regarding why there's a line of work that at Pluribus we have recently started, and it's D&I, diversity and inclusion coaching. And I'm very excited about it because we are convinced that it is providing something that was missing in the current offer in order to make change effective. Right? We all know that organizational change is difficult. There are many factors that influence it, and so far we have been working a lot with trainings and train the trainers, and we are still working. And now with this one-on-one coaching, we're very excited because as I said, it's like it's providing something new. And what is it providing, right? I remember like the last time we connected about this call is we were using this metaphor about the hardware and the software. And so we thought, okay, so if so each one of us is a leader, and you know, people in the organizations, being the leaders of the organizations, we could, you know, take them as having a certain hardware, you know, certain capacity for adopting new leadership skills, right? And we could talk about diversity and inclusion skills as a sort of software, right? And using this metaphor, right? Why often D&I approaches sometimes fail, right? So we were okay, because sometimes we find leaders that the hardware they have does not match, you know, the needs of the D&I software, right? So in that sense, coaching, the intention of coaching is to really support leaders to build this structure, to scaffold their structure of skills, so they can really embody and implement diversity and inclusion strategies we all desire, right?
Yeah, thank you, Magda. I like this idea of hardware and software, because for me it's an illustration of what we're experiencing when we are engaging leaders in various organizations to understand, not only with their heads, but also with their hearts and with their hands. So it's really about understanding, engaging, and then acting. And most often when leaders are joining our conversations in a workshop, for example, you could feel the motivation, you could feel the commitment, and yet there is a sense of frustration, because organizations are asking a lot from leaders today. There are a lot of initiatives, a lot of priorities, a lot of restructurations, which is part of the life of any organization. And leaders are taking sometimes the notion of inclusion and diversity as something that is on top of. While when they understand it's part of the leadership capacity, when it's really part of the software that they need to embed into their own hardware, then it's easier for them to understand that they can actually play a role. They can play a role because it's not on top of, but it's embedded in who they really are. So our intention, whether it's during a workshop or conversation or coaching, is to ensure that there is a clear conversation about simple actions, simple behaviors that are embedded into their leadership styles, recognizing their uniqueness and respecting their own styles, but in a way that it's not separate, but totally embedded. So we are working with some clear list of what are the key inclusive behaviors. And of course, you could have probably dozens of lists. There are a lot of lists that have been generated by a lot of organizations, studies. We are working with 6 behaviors that are really impacting the feeling of inclusion. One is listening to understand. And in order to listen to understand, you need to slow down the pace. You need to suspend your judgments. You need to hear the voice. So, for example, we're using the tool of checking for inclusion, and we can maybe come back to that later. But the idea is to always try to find very practical tool that help, for each of these behaviors. So the first one is listening to understand.
Yes.
The second,
if I could jump in just to elaborate a bit more, right? And It's just, again, like playing with this idea of, you know, just, so there's a skill we can learn, but do we have the capacity to implement that skill? We have the space, you know, in ourselves to do it. And here, like listening to understand, right? Being open-minded and suspending judgment. So to listen, we need to have inner space and inner quiet, right? And as you said, we need to have the capacity to slow down and be able to listen with our whole body, right? And not only, you know, with our habits, right? We can listen from habit, or we can listen from you know, different ways of listening. So in that sense, like if we work one-on-one on developing that skill, you know, we can work on that person with that person and take him or her from there and upgrade their listening capacity, and that's when coaching could be very supportive.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, thank you, Magda. Yes, I think maybe as a way of moving forward in that webinar, maybe we should actually spend time on each of them, like we are doing it. So slowing down, the capacity to be able to slowing down with the intent then to go faster. You know, I love this sentence, which is about going slow to go fast. It's also giving ourselves the permission to go slower, because, you know, sometimes we want to go too fast. We are making shortcuts. We are unconsciously making decisions that are based on some biases or some filters or some stereotypes, you know, and it's happening all the time. So this capacity and willingness to slowing down, to really actively listen, to understand, will increase the quality of our conversation. So the check-in for inclusion, you know, the check-in is really, you know, what we use as a process when we're going to the airport or when we're going to the, you know, to the hotel, is to be seen, to be visible, to be fully present. So that the quality of presence, you know, when you are seen, is critical. How many times, and I can reflect on my own life, you know, working in big corporations, you know, all over the world, how many times I felt unseen or invisible. And because of that, feeling very frustrated, if not really sad. And at the end, well, you're dismissing your own contribution. So you can exclude yourself just because you think, you know, I'm not seen, I'm not taken seriously. So having a voice and creating the space for everyone to have a voice, to be seen and to be heard, is really a capacity that you know, we need to promote. And having a one-to-one coaching, for example, by just focusing on the skills of generous listening, is really sometimes you know, extremely powerful.
Totally. Yes, and building on that, like, you know, so when we're listening, to what are we listening, right? Are we listening to things that are said, to things that are not said, right? And here this connects to this notion of psychological safety, right? Is our environment, the environment that we create as leaders, psychological safe, so that people can share fully, right? And that would be, you know, a whole new domain, right? But I think this capacity for listening also, and this links to a coaching session I had just yesterday, right? It's like, so in groups, you know, there's this like dominant people in the group, right? That could be related to hierarchy or status or different aspects, right? And often people from non-dominant groups, you know, will tend to express less, share less, and so as leaders, right? How can we tune in and listen into what is not being said and create the conditions for people to really share fully, right? And that's part of it, right?
Yeah, and thank you for bringing the all the research done on psychological safety, and notably the work from Amy Edmondson, who has published this book and she's talking on several TEDx. One of our colleagues, one of our senior Pluribus associate, Dorian Baroni, is really one of the experts in bringing this notion of psychological safety and the connection with the team effectiveness and the team efficiency. So, for some of you who are, participating in this webinar, who are listening to us, I would invite you to check on the website, on the internet, the work of Amy Edmondson. Really worth looking at. So that was the first one, listening to understand. The second one is giving and receiving feedback. I think that this one has, of course, a very strong link with the notion of safety and trust, as we just described. But many times when we are meeting with clients, partners, and the first question we ask them is, do you have a culture of feedback? And I'm surprised because most often, people have the feeling that it's lacking. And that culture of feedback is so critical to build inclusion, because that's the only way, or at least one of the most important way to get access to some of our blind spots. There is a very strong distinction between our intention and our behaviors or actions. So you could have a very, very good intention, and yet you might exclude or offend someone just because you don't know. How would you recognize that? You need to put in place a very safe environment for people to be able to provide feedback, but also to give feedback. But in order to do that, you need to create that space. And you need to have the right mindset and the right tool. That's why we are always promoting the tool of constructive feedback. So the constructive feedback is based on the nonviolent communication. It's also based on a lot of work that are being done on, through Carl Jung on the archetypes, trying to find the right way to balance facts and emotions. So the constructive feedback is, first of all, having the right mindset to have the conversation. So your intention, if you want to have this conversation, is indeed to have a positive outcomes. So you're not having this conversation because you want to create a conflict. No, you want to have this conversation because it's meaningful, it's important for you, and it's because you really want to have a positive outcomes. So first the mindset, then starting with the factual information. And most often, we want to be very quick, we want to go to the point, we tend to go very quickly into our interpretation. So here again, it's about being able to step back and recognize the factual information that, in a way, created or put you in a feeling. So from that specific information, the second step is having a feeling. I'm feeling something. So, for example, if with Magda we had a meeting at 9, and Magda is arriving at 9:30, the factual information, if I want to provide a constructive feedback to Magda, with the positive intent to have an open dialogue, is Magda, we had a meeting at 9, you arrived at 9:30. That's the factual information. I felt angry. So the feeling I had was really the anger. And we need to make the distinction between the feeling and the interpretation, which is the next step. So in terms of feeling, there are 5 big families of feelings. we have anger, joy, sadness, fear, and shame. And of course, out of these 5 big families of feelings, you have different words. So I could have said, I feel frustrated, or I feel anger, because it's really part of the anger. Then my interpretation. I feel anger because for me, in my own world, using my own filters, I don't feel respected. For me, it's a sign of non-respect. So I'm not telling you, Magda, you're not respecting me. I'm just saying, based on this factual information and how I feel, I'm actually explaining you the meaning behind my feeling. Okay? And then the 4th step is the change I would like to see, or the wish, which is here in, let's say, in that example, would be, can we agree that next time, we're starting on time? So that could be my request. And of course, the next step is to open up the dialogue for you to also give your own perspective. Because maybe you're going to say, well, yes, I'm late, and I had a car accident. So suddenly the whole thing is different. So going back to this tool of constructive feedback, and making the connection with the D&I coaching, is being able to practice the tool. So it's like being a sportive person. You need to practice. You need to do your gym. First time you have a lot of it's very hicky and it's hurting. But the more you're practicing, the more you are feeling okay. So the coaching will help also practicing again and again, because again, the constructive feedback is one of the most simple and powerful tools to build inclusion. I don't know, Magda, if you have some other example.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's it's a cornerstone skill, because it speaks of the way we talk, and by altering the way we talk, it's a tool to alter our consciousness. So, often before people are familiar with nonviolent communication, or the model we use, there are things that happen that confuse us and confuse the other person, and that creates conflict and misunderstandings. And for instance, a common one is thinking that my interpretation, it's the same as the fact, right? And we all know it's not, but it's fascinating how quickly we make the jump, and verbally we say, you made me angry, right? And that's not a fact, right? That's a false attribution of a feeling. So with this tool, we train our capacity to become responsible of what we think, what we interpret, and what we want from others, right? Because sometimes when we're having a conversation, or a difficult conversation, such as the one you gave the example, right? We go into it without knowing what we want, what is our intention, right? So this tool really gives us like the scaffolding, the structure for us to be very clear about, what are the facts, what we feel, what we interpret, and what we want. And as you said, is that at the beginning it's kind of like it's not very comfortable to use this. It feels strange, but as you get used to it, it's like it's something that can really be very, very transformative, and also is a tool that gives us the chance to explore anything, right? And I think that concerning to diversity and inclusion, that's fundamental, because we're talking about another way, and we support organizations in this work is through unconscious bias trainings, and most of the stuff that is not allowing us to be more inclusive, it's unconscious mindsets and thinking, and by putting words into it, by going into these difficult conversations, by sharing our assumptions or understandings or projections, we are able to shed light and make this unconscious conscious, and then move forward. So we don't get stuck in these old dynamics, old assumptions, old ways of relating to each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Mm-hmm. And we also need to promote using the constructive feedback also to acknowledge successes, celebrate successes. Because I really believe that because of the fast pace in organizations and in teams, we tend to put the celebration on the side. But you could use exactly the same model, to provide constructive feedback, to celebrate a specific situation, and that's also about inclusion. You need to use it really. We will really encourage all of us. I mean, we need to practice as well. It's awkward, as you said. It could be awkward, but the more you are using it, the better it is. So that's the second behaviors. The third one is seeking multiple point of view. So that specific skill that you could also develop through D&I coaching by having conversations is to actually again stop and reflect on who are the people around us in our teams, in our professional environment, but also in our personal environment, that we are really trusting, that we are really encouraged to work with us. And most often when we do that, when you just reflect on who are the people around us, who are the people around me, you might realize that the people who are around you are people who are sharing some dimensions of your own diversity dimensions. So if I am a woman from a specific age, from a specific background or a specific nationality, with specific either motivation or styles, leadership styles, I might recognize that actually all the people around me in my teams or my friends are sharing some very strong diversity dimensions. So what happens, in fact, in our day-to-day environment, if everybody is a woman from my generation, from the same language, with the same ways of thinking, well, I will not really be inclined to challenge or to completely radically think differently. So it's very important in order to not only value but to optimize from the richness of the diversity of our teams is to ensure that our teams are diverse. So I think it's a question of having the mindset, and I think here is the connection also with the business case. Why, and what are the benefits of having a diverse team? There are benefits, and it's only when you have inclusion that you could really optimize on the benefits. So I think you need humility for that specific skills to recognize that naturally, because as human beings, we want to be in our comfort zone, naturally, we're going to have people who are sharing some of our identities in a way. I don't know, Magda, if you have some examples to illustrate that specific behaviors.
Yeah, thank you. So what comes to mind, like you named some of the dimensions of diversity, and there are like the more visible, the less visible, and it's difficult sometimes, like, to know what comes from where, and so a reflection that I think it's interesting too. It's like when we have a certain culture in an organization, like unconsciously members tend to want to accommodate to that culture, to say what is expected according to the culture, and that may hinder, you know, creativity, constructiveness, new points of view, right? And so, like, seeing these multiple points of view, I think there's this acknowledgement that reality is complex and changing, and there's not a single perspective of what's true. On the contrary, you know, we all have small parts of the truth, of what's true, of what's valid, what could be useful, and seeking this multiplicity of points of view. It's really key, as you said, in the business case, because we will be smarter, we'll have more ideas, we'll be more creative. In that sense, so it's like, how do we invite these different points of view, the most opposite from us, right? Could be the most stretchy ones, the more perhaps uncomfortable to acknowledge, but, you know, really we need this inner stretch, right? To be able to hold these different points of view, because there's unquestionable gains for the organization and for us as leaders. So yeah, I think that's a fundamental skill. That's what I would add. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, humility to extend our comfort zone, because I mean, I must say, I have to confess, I mean, in terms of probably cultures, different cultures, you know, and gender, and there are a lot of different dimensions, but I recognize that I tend to be less comfortable when I'm getting, you know, challenges from Generation Y because of different, you know, it needs to be quicker. So we're learning, and we need to acknowledge that. You know, if we are truly intentionally inclusive leader, we need to recognize our weaknesses, and I recognize mine, and I really would like, and I'm, you know, in the process of challenging myself, especially on that specific dimension. Yes.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And one other point I'd like to add is that it's sometimes could be misunderstood is you know, welcoming or seeking multiple points of view to reaching consensus, and, you know, and that's not what we mean at all by when we advocate, you know, for organizations to seek multiple points of view, you know, and you know, listening to all views and different points of view. It's useful if we expect consensus, or if we give equal value to each one of the points of view, then, you know, we might be paralyzed, or, you know. So I guess, like, here I would point you to the work of Frederic Laloux in Reinventing Organizations, when he talks about the teal organizations, the most evolved organizations, when there's this capacity to listen to all the voices, and then there's one decision maker that takes responsibility, and having the wisdom from all the system, he makes a decision, he or she makes a decision. And so in a way, it's not an either or, right? But it's more like both and. That's where, you know.
Yes. Well, thank you, Magda. I think it was important to add that point. Yes. Then I'd like to talk about this other behavior, which is enhancing inclusion in my team. This one is probably one of the most challenging in a way, because this is really the one that requires a lot of courage. It's the courage to be able to speak up. It's the ability to intervene, but also at the same time, it's the one that is really putting your hands together. So it means the action. So someone who is actively enhancing inclusion in the team is really someone who is walking the talk. So I think there is a link here where you need to have, you know, most of the other behaviors in order to be able to practice this one. So, for example, I can, you know, I speak up when people are excluded. or I accommodate others' leadership and work styles. I pay attention to all diversity aspects, for example, mindset, behaviors, personal traits. So it's really a skill that needs to be discussed and to really be embedded in daily lives. So, do you have any example from your side on this one?
Yeah, as you said, like this to me is like the being part of inclusion and diversity, right? I think now less, but we used to talk about getting diversity or getting the D&I thing, and it's not about getting it; it's about being, embodying these behaviors, right? And when we do this, then we do all these things, right? When our software is fully integrated and we have the awareness, right? Now I think we are going to move to awareness. When we have this D&I awareness of diversity and we have an intention to include, then these behaviors happen naturally, right? And as you said, it's a muscle that needs to be built, and that's what we do, right? Support organizations build this muscle. Yeah.
I think that specific behavior is when you are fully convinced that when someone in your team or a colleague feels that he or she belongs and is recognized for his or her uniqueness, then that person is going to be happy at work, to be motivated, to be willing to do the extra mile. So there will be such a positive impact on the whole atmosphere, the whole climate of the team. And the other thing I'd like to add, and this is really general, each time we're talking about inclusive, the inclusive leader or inclusive leadership, I just want to make sure people understand we're talking not about hierarchy, like a hierarchical, standpoint, but it could be leadership in a more generic understanding. So you are an employee, and you could be an inclusive leader. It's not about hierarchy. It's about how you lead your conversation, your teamwork, your collaboration. So it goes beyond. And I know we are providing D&I coaching most often for leaders in organizations, and this is part of a specific population. But at the same time, I really want to be inclusive in the way that inclusive leadership is really for all of us, regardless of the hierarchical or the status in the organization. Then the next one is being clear on what being clear on what is expected. I think sometimes, and most of the time, actually, when we are, supporting organizations to promote and embed inclusion and diversity into their, strategies, the first question we have is that, okay, it's nice to hear about diversity, it's nice to hear about inclusion, but what does it mean really? And why are we doing that? And what would be the impact on the bottom line? And what would be the impact in terms of the employee satisfaction? And what would be the impact on how we recruit and how we are developing our talent, et cetera, et cetera. So being clear on what is expected is also a way to ensure that what is expected is also part of a specific framework within the organization. I really believe that the D&I coaching could really help clarifying what it means for that specific teams or organizations. So, for example, one tool that we're using at the beginning of each workshop, but we're also using at the beginning of every meeting, is having a framework that we called Principle for Inclusive Meeting or Principle for an Inclusive Workshop. It's what are the key principles, what are the contracts that we are putting in place in order to have an inclusive dialogue. Because if it's clear from the very beginning, then the conversation, if people are in agreement, of course, this is just an offer, people need to be in an agreement, then people will be able to speak up. And we talked earlier about this notion of trust, of safety, of respect. These can be very simple ways of ensuring that, you know, when you have a conversation or you have a meeting, it's clear that everybody, you know, should respect each other's opinion. Not to necessarily, as you said, Magda, to reach a consensus, but to ensure that everybody can bring their perspective. And then, of course, as you said, based on all these inputs and the wisdom, then there will be different decisions. But it's important to be clear of what is expected. So the learning principles, for example, or principle for inclusive meeting, they're very simple to put in place, extremely simple. But if you do that in a rigorous way, you know, and you are offering that with your team or your colleagues, it's something that really, really changed the atmosphere of the meeting itself. Don't know, Magda.
Thank you, Lisa. Yeah, I think like, so this one, being clear, right? It's like being explicit, right? And culture in organizations, it's really implicit most of the time, right? We start in an organization, we find, you know, certain culture, things happen in a certain way, we interiorize that, and we assume that's the way things should be, right? So basically, what we're saying here, it's no, you know, like. If you want to make your working environment more inclusive and diverse, you perhaps need to consider a different set of rules, right? On how we meet, how we talk to each other, how we challenge each other, how we give permission to share certain things, so on and so forth. And so this being explicit and being clear on what is expected, really, what it does is it provides us a way in which we can check on ourselves whether are we doing it or not, right? Because it's clear, it's simple, and then you can say, okay, are we doing it? Are we not doing? You know, what's happening? What are the results? And as you said, is you know, sometimes it looks very simple and, you know, and plain, but if you implement, for instance, the ground rules we share with our clients in meetings, right? It truly changes the outcome, right? Because it's like giving explicit permission for people to do certain things, and that, you know, it's changing the rules of the game. So that's fundamental. Yes.
Yeah. One example would be a share. It could be sharing the airspace, ensuring everybody can contribute.
Right.
So if we are really walking the talk and during the meeting, we realize that there is a tendency for hearing always the same people, for example, then there will be a very simple ways to stop and to say, well, are we practicing some of the principles that we have put, you know, we have offered to the whole group? So that would be a very simple way of...
Sure. Another way could be like, if you know, to offer participants to change their way of being in a meeting. So if, you know, someone that's always sharing his or her views, you know, that to try to listen more, right? And people that tend to listen more, like to try to share more and share insights, right? So it's like really playing in the field of the meeting, you know, different ways of being that will create different results. Totally, you know. So
absolutely. And then the last but not the least, cultivating self-awareness. In that specific behavior, there are plenty of you know, possible attitudes, and certainly you know, working on on our own unconscious bias, trying to understand maybe some of the personal roots of our biases. So being willing to challenge, you know, some of our, I would say, automatic modes. But there is one specific practice that I'd like to highlight today, is the notion of mindfulness. So I really believe that the notion of being mindful and slowing down in terms of, you know, even, you know, getting some times to breathe. You know, it could be just 1 minute, but that that mindfulness, this ability to slow down and to just take some time during the day to take 3 minutes breathing exercise would immensely increase the quality of our being and the quality of our capacity to be inclusive. And I know that more and more organizations now are talking about the importance of mindfulness. They are talking more and more about the notion of well-being. And that's great to hear that companies are now opening up to these topics. I know a few years ago when we were using even the term mindfulness, people were, what are you talking about? Now I think there is a growing understanding of what we mean by that. Still a lot of work to do, but it's something that we have been designing and promoting is what is the, who is the inclusive leader? And an inclusive leader is someone who is a mindful leader. So the connection is very, very key, and we need to encourage ourselves, also for ourselves to practice it, to slow down and give our brains the permissions to re-oxygenate itself.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the pace is so fast and furious, and it's like this ability to intentionally stop, right? Like simple practices, as you said. Like one is like having 3 breaths together before starting a meeting, like just 3 breaths. Like it doesn't even take a minute, right? And this has the capacity to change the whole atmosphere or sense of spaciousness, the way, the place from where we share, so on and so forth. Another one would be like in a meeting when something strong or like big has been shared, to have a moment of silence, to recognize that. And to me, like, cultivating self-awareness also is this idea of, going beyond the professional. So if we're self-aware, we're aware of our whole self, not just the professional self, right? I think that in here it's included this, this capacity to bring the fullness of who we are into the workplace, and as leaders, having this intention to invite this wholeness from people, right? The contrary would be, okay, I'm having a terrible time at home, I'm going through a divorce or whatever, but I'm not showing this up here at work because I'm not supposed to, right? And this thing is leaking anyhow, right? So to me, like, self-awareness would be creating the permission for people to share, what's going on the other half of their lives, in the private life, and also, like, having this shared awareness, allows us to be inclusive of difficult situations, challenging times that we all have, illnesses, transitions, and that when we are able to include this, to support these situations, then, big differences are made. People feel they belong, they feel acknowledged, they feel loved, and we tend to give the best of ourselves when this happens. So that means the business stage again.
Thank you. The notion of wholeness does resonate a lot, and this notion of authenticity, as you were describing, your example, a new offering that is led by Cécile Masson, who is one of our senior Pluribus associates based in the Netherlands. She has been doing some work on embraining. So it's really about having a holistic approach as a leader, reconciling the head, the heart, and the body. So very soon we'll be able to actually, propose this new approach to our partners. But it's really about cultivating self-awareness from a holistic way. So not only focusing on one aspect. Wow. Well, thank you, Magda. I think we've gone through the 6 key behaviors. I wish we could say we have a miracle recipe, but we don't. I think we have key ingredients, but not a magical recipe. I think every individual, every team, every organization will need to find its own recipe, but it's still some good key ingredients to practice, to promote, to live the inclusion and diversity values. We are passionate, obviously, about that topic. So, we are so much willing to, learn and discover more. We are really learning every day. Every day is a learning experience, and having this mindset actually is very helpful, because then we are not, staying on a sort of a stagnation. Every day is a new experience. You're meeting new clients, new organizations in a different countries, in a different context, different industry, and it could be different. And yet there are some commonalities, and these commonalities is really this this urgency to promote inclusion and value diversity. So I don't know if you want to say a few words to conclude, or if we are done what we wanted to share.
Thank you so much, for this dialogue, and thanks for the people that are listening and the ones that will listen to the recorded version of it. And just that we are here, we're available, and we are learning, and we look forward to seeing you all in another webinar soon.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Magda. Thank you for this very informal dialogue. Sharing our examples, views, experiences, and I wish you a great end of the day. And thank you, everyone, for being with us. As I said, because this video was recorded, it will be posted in our Facebook, LinkedIn, everywhere. So you'll have the chance to either use it or, recommend to some of your colleagues or friends. So all the best. And soon we will advertise our next free webinar. So I can see that there are some questions. Let me see. But and I cannot see the whole screen. Can you see the screen?
They will be able to have the record, of course. Yeah, so we will, if you have registered to the webinar, we will send you a link with the recorded webinar conversation. So that's for sure. And then, yeah, just a note of thank you. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. And again, the good news is that we had participants from various continents again today. So it's a truly global event, and it's exciting. So all the best for everyone, and let's be the inclusion promoter, especially in our world today. So all the best to everyone. Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Au revoir. Bye bye.
Bye.
Hasta luego.
Hello.